on these vendors here. And as you can see here, the evaluations along with any responses provided by the vendors are below. So what was nice is I came across this list, and this is just a screenshot of the list, and I have the link here that you can go to. And what's nice is you can actually download these documents. You know, they're dated when they ran these lists or ran these checks, and you can go ahead and see what information they found in regards to accessibility. So I'm just gonna quickly switch over. Hopefully this will bring up my web browser, because I wanna bring up one of the documents just to show you. Pull this over here. Let's see. I'm gonna choose anyone in particular. Let's go with the one that I have, Gail. We'll go with Gail Primary Resources. I think I have that printed out. So you get, you click on this and you get a nice little PDF. And it'll tell you, you know, the company that kind of ran this. Each report is different. This one is different. Like their format layout might be different, but all the information is basically the same. And you'll see here that it gives you a summary that talks about the grouping, images, links, all the stuff that that deals with accessibility. So this is kind of a nice way, I think, to, if you're checking to see, I know one of the things that I was also researching is a lot of LibGuides, a lot of libraries will put on their list which databases are kind of like compliant with this accessibility, which is kind of nice. So libraries are kind of like doing their own assessment and putting that down. And I don't know if other libraries in SUNY actually do that. We at Oswego don't necessarily mark those as databases that are, you know, that have a VPAT and are accessible.
We're still seeing the library e-resource accessibility testing list. I don't know if you had intended for us to see one of the reports.
Yeah, I moved it over, and maybe it's because of I moved over the screen. Let's see. This is really, I have these dual screens coming up, and let's see if that comes back up. All right, now you should see screen there, right?
Yes, now we're seeing.
Okay, yep, all right, thank you. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yep, it's,
I appreciate that, Carrie.
Yep, we're seeing just a very small portion of the document, however.
Yeah,
okay.
And I'm just briefly kind of going through it. It's kind of hard to see, kind of zoom in on it. And like I said, each report can be different, and it'll list like who ran the report, the contact information gives you a summary. Some reports are actually like a summary of an email, looks like a, looks kind of like a memo, and then it gives, if I scroll down here, it breaks it down by accessibility findings, a lot of stuff that people that deal with accessibility understand, and I'll kind of like talk about that later. One of the things that I realized when I was looking through this is I didn't know much about this, and I think that's one of the things that's important, is that many of us don't. And we kind of like have to find this information and do the research to know what this is. Let me go to another one. And here's the website, which I linked to in my slides. Let me just try. Let's give you a quick view of these others. MassINet, it's the same company that did this one. I know there's one that was done by Michigan University, or at least it's sent to Michigan University, JSTOR. But here's a list of it, and it's not a list of everything. So that's the thing also that's important to know, you know, depending on funding and how much time, not every database is going to have like independently run assessment for accessibility, nor are they going to have VPAT for everything. So one of the things that is difficult is getting this all together in some kind of repository where people, or some kind of website, or some kind of collection where people can access all this information. You know, we're often like looking for this stuff here and there and pieces of it, you know, finding a report here to share. But this is stuff I found. And I also wanted to also mention that, you know, this was a project kind of that I wanted to start right before COVID-19 started. And it seems now that everything that's going on with COVID has like turned everything around, you know, especially the way libraries, you know, how we're running our libraries, everyone's working remotely. So a lot of this stuff, unfortunately, got put towards the back burner because I had to deal with managing a lot of electronic resources, making all these free available resources available, keeping on top of all of that. But I think now that libraries, you know, we're kind of entering a difficult time and phase where more online research is being done or being relied on because students are doing more of it now, since there's going to be more online classes. So I feel like it's definitely more important now than ever. Not that it wasn't before, but now it's more relevant to make sure that this stuff is accessible and that they are accessible. So I'm just going to switch back, hopefully, to my presentation. And just let me know.
Shannon Pritting has a note that he's put in the Q&A that just states Big Ten uses 2 vendors for their reviews, an accessibility group, ARC, out of Michigan State University, and DeQ University, which does accessibility training. Right.
Those are the 2 groups. That's the thanks, Shannon, for pointing that out. That's the one report that I showed you first, and then Michigan State was the other one.
Right.
Report that I kind of showed you. And like I said, this is all like a learning thing for me. Yeah, so that's what I found, and I found it that was very, very helpful, at least trying to get that information and understand. Let me just go back. Oh yeah, here's the slide here. So I want to kind of like fall back a little bit on how I got into this, or how this kind of came about.
And we're not seeing your slides right now. We're still seeing the report.
Okay. Boy, this is really.
I think with the dual monitors and the screen share.
Yeah, I think I'm like screwing myself up with the screen share dual monitor. All right, just give me 1 second, but I think I'm getting the hang of it. Is it there now?
We are good now.
Okay, good. Yeah. Okay, so what I was asked to be part of, SUNY Oswego has this working group on accessibility practices. And we already have a librarian, her name is Laura Harris, who's been on this committee for quite some time now. And she is our OER librarian, just trying to, okay. She's our distance learning librarian. So she knows a lot about this stuff, and actually she's kind of like my go-to person with all of this since I'm learning. So I was asked to join this group, and another librarian, our associate director, Lynn Reese, is also part of this group. And so basically this group on campus is to promote a campus culture on accessibility, working together. They, you know, one of the things that we realized as part of this group, which I've only met a few times, the accessibility part. So they actually came to our library and showed us how to look at a database and talked about the VPAT and basically showed us, hey, this is how you kind of evaluate a vendor's database website. And then that's when I kind of got interested in this, and I was like, wow, this is really important. So yeah, so I joined that group, and here's a little bit more about the group. There's a digital accessibility analyst. She's the co-chair, along with a professor in literature and technology, and then the rest of the group here. So one of the things that was interesting with meeting with this group is, you know, they came to our library and they asked us, you know, if they could show us about accessibility. We were like, you know, this is great. Sure, come on and like give your presentation on how to evaluate databases. But what was interesting is they kind of like had no idea how much libraries are involved, or at least should be involved, right? And so I know that when I meet with this group, one of the things they were hoping was to have one of us promote this group and what we're doing. And I was like, well, you know, SUNYLA is coming up. Let me put in a proposal. And they were like, that's great. So that's the whole purpose of this kind of conversation, is to, or this presentation / conversation, is to get this kind of conversation going within SUNY. And again, doing research, I know I'm aware that these conversations are going on, but I'm hoping to, as this group, as we all meet here, we can kind of like promote this stuff within us. So anyway, so, you know, I'm meeting with this group, and they honestly don't know, with meeting with them, they're like, they don't know what libraries are doing, or what charge they have, or, you know, and I feel like it's important, one, to educate the group, because it's made up of people outside the library. You know, it's made up of teaching faculty, people from campus IT, there's extended learning, obviously there's the accessibility people, and they really don't know what we're doing, what we should be doing. So I think it's important for our role as librarians, especially in this group, is to kind of help them understand. And the other thing I think is important is, as I always say with things with libraries and librarians, is if we don't have a skin in the game, a lot of this stuff from other groups, and especially vendors, they're going to take it upon themselves to do this for us. And then we're going to be kind of like out of the conversation, or, you know, and then we're struggling to kind of like raise our hands and say, hey, you know, we're libraries, we're librarians, we know this stuff too. We should be in this conversation. So that's kind of how it came about. And what I learned from Laura is that Penfield Library years ago, before I got here, and I want to say maybe 5 years ago or more, they tried this initiative, or not they tried, they worked on this kind of initiative, and they had a spreadsheet where they were going through databases, and as you can see here, the screenshot here, I'm just showing the list of databases that we had, and kind of the work they were doing. And one of the things that is difficult is, of course, with staffing is always difficult, people leaving, a lot of these kind of initiatives fall by the wayside because it's hard to keep up. And it's hard to keep up. What we realize is that, you know, one, Penfield Library doesn't have all these databases, right? So there's other institutions that use different databases, or we might acquire new ones and we might lose one. So oftentimes these lists don't get updated, or vendors actually, they'll change their platform and they will be compliant, or they'll make it worse, you know? So it's very time consuming. And what I realized that, you know, we had this list, which was great, but I feel like if there was like this central kind of effort for us as a SUNY to kind of do that, and as libraries as a whole. So that's the part where I've been trying to research that and find out who's been doing what conversations we've been having. So what I thought of like is like what's next, and this is the part again. This is the part where, you know, I started this initiative. I was working on it, and things have gotten sidetracked, and I'm hopefully able to have Penfield pick this up again. So what's next for us is hopefully is to continue updating the accessibility of library resources and services, which is that document that we have, or maybe even change it into some kind of LibGuide or something, working with the accessibility work group to keep them informed, and also to help them with us. And the other thing I want to do, and I know Shannon is sitting in here, so he probably knows a lot more and can speak on that, is like, what is the SLC doing, or what have they done? I know they have done things in the past. Talking to my library director, she's mentioned a few things. I haven't really dove into like all that's going on with that. Things also reach out to Nasli, the coordinator of disability, diversity, and non-traditional student services. She's great. Actually, I know, I've known Nasli since I worked at Binghamton when I was working in IT. And I remember talking to her about this stuff and her educating me on how difficult it is to, you know, with technology and keeping up with this. And I thought this was like something that really interests me, and it was great. And as my career progressed, things get shuffled around, obviously, but she's a great resource, and there's other resources, other people that we can reach out to other SUNY schools, and reach out to vendors, which is also important. So basically what I'm saying is we need to continue to like have this conversation and make sure that libraries are part of this broader discussion. And because I feel like, especially with accessibility, if we're not talking about it, and we're not maybe meeting, putting it, you know, out in conferences, when you're out at, you know, giving presentations on it, when you're in conferences and you're talking to vendors, you know, bring this up in your conversations with them. I think, you know, we can do our best efforts with that. And these are just some of the resources I have. And I know this presentation is kind of like a little bit shorter on my presentation, but what I'm hoping for now is really to like open up a discussion and have people like ask questions, and not even just questions of me or with others, to kind of throw these things out there. If people are, you know, willing to have this conversation, I know we're online, which is great. So you don't have to feel, I feel like it's easier to just throw out questions when you're online. Like I said, looking at the number of attendees, I see that we have a pretty big number, as if we were meeting inside. So yeah, so that's basically what I have, and I'm gonna kind of like turn it over to Carrie, that she was monitoring the chat. Hopefully we have questions. I wasn't really paying attention to the chat.
Yep, we have 2 questions. I'm just going to note a couple things in the chat here. We do have 2 links that have been shared. One is a CUNY repository with VPATs, and one is the SLC LibGuide, which has a third-party repository which contains VPATs that is being worked on. So those are both shared in the chat. And Shannon also notes that a workplace group about library accessibility has been started as well, and there's a link to join. You have to authenticate via your SUNY authorizing credentials, but that is in the meeting chat as well. And then in the Q&A, we do have 2 questions. And one asks, is there a fee to see the reviews? So I think that's referring to what you were sharing toward the beginning of your presentation, the links.
Yeah, so there's no fee for that. That's completely free. You can download the PDF. And yeah, that's the great thing. A lot of these resources you can find. I mean, that's just one of them that I found, but a lot of them are free and should be free for vendors. that offer that. But yeah, that's free.
All right. And the other one, I think may spark some conversation. And they are asking, are these lists guides actually helpful? Do vendors care? Is it helpful for people with disabilities?
Yeah, and that's a good question, right? Because oftentimes we have these lists, and especially if you go to libraries, LibGuides, or on their website, they'll list them, and that's often like the difficulty in libraries. You know, we put a lot of information out there, and we're always like, is this important? Are people clicking on it? Is it even useful? Is it even worth our time? And you're right. And the other question is, do vendors care? And oftentimes I feel like vendors care only when they're hit with a lawsuit or when it hurts their pocket, right? I mean, that's not always the case with every vendor. Not every vendor is evil. But I feel like if they're not pressured, they're not really going to put in an effort, right? And I feel like those that advocate for accessibility are the ones pressuring them. Is it helpful for people with disabilities? I think so. I think at the very least, if you just help one person, and my belief is if you help one person and you have this information out there, you've done so much. And oftentimes, you know, if you meet someone who has that need and they're asking you and you don't have something to point to, I mean, that's kind of like your measure that, oh, maybe we should kind of have this. So yeah, I think it's important and it is helpful for to people know. And maybe I think what's also important is like people with disabilities to even be able to report this and say, you know, I'm having trouble. I can't read this with the screen reader, or this database isn't accessible. And that's something we should like be mindful of. So.
Absolutely. I'm going to throw my own 2 cents in here just because, sure. You know, it asks, is it helpful for people with disabilities? Are the guides and such helpful? I'm on the campus EIT committee for submitting our plan to SUNY, working on accessibility for the library. And I think one of the points that we really talked about was that sometimes you don't know who you're helping. And we do this and we don't know, people don't self-identify, and that's okay. But you don't know all the number of people that you're helping when we make our resources accessible. And I think that's just as important, that there's so many people out there that by us doing the work, we're reaching a lot more people than we may realize. So my 2 cents there that I wanted to to throw out there. Shannon has a note. SUNY had an extensive interview with Big Ten ASERL about their efforts with VPET reviews. They indicated that they had very good response from vendors. Vendors took it seriously and made the changes that they could. Question, are vendors under any kind of legal obligation to provide accessible content? We have these federal accessibility laws and there may be state versions. Do we know if any of these apply to vendors?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are, you know, I know of like vendors can be hit with lawsuits, you know, when they don't comply. And I think it varies. I would have to really look at the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and like go through it. I'm not an expert on this. Again, this is something I just started, but these are definitely like questions that we could be asking SUNY system admin like Nasli and stuff that I think would help. So I can't say for sure, but I know libraries or universities have been hit with kind of lawsuits. I know recently SUNY, I believe, was hit with it, and a lot of SUNY IT people went for like training years back. So.
Mm-hmm. We have another comment. At SCCC, we handle database compliance through our procurement process. We have seen a change in vendors' attitudes since we started, since we can't purchase products that don't comply unless we get an exception. we have a defined process and documentation needed to get an exception. I think that really plays into, I think we'll see more of that SUNY-wide as we get these EIT processes and plans. I know that those are all due to SUNY this month. So I think we'll see more of that happening, similar to what we're starting to see at SCCC.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I was not, yeah, thank you, Fiona, for pointing that out, because again, I wasn't aware of that. And I think that's a great way of getting vendors to comply, not just relying on kind of these reports, having a conversation and then them being open to it too. Like I said, oftentimes when it hurts their pocket, that's when they really start to step up.
Does anyone else have questions? I see there's a few comments in the chat that are supporting some of the questions and discussions we've had. Brady says that he searched for located VPATs online for all of their vendors. Had one who will remain nameless who asked me, what is a VPAT? He sent them a link to the form and they filled it out. I think we've all perhaps had some similar experience as hopefully a small company that's learning. It's definitely a time to share resources, and we're starting to see that, particularly as so many of us utilize similar and the same databases and the same resources. So, you know, why do the work over and over again?
Right, I agree. And that's the best part. And that's one of the things that, you know, and this is kind of like just my take on why I really enjoy SUNY. I will say this, and maybe this is not the appropriate venue to say, but I am leaving SUNY, and I'm a little heartbroken that I'm leaving such a fine group of people and institutions where we all collectively help each other. So getting back to kind of what Carrie said is sharing all that information, I think is great. And I think that's that's one of those great, strong elements I loved about SUNY, or I love about SUNY, is how we can all collectively help each other. And we're not in it alone, you know. Definitely saw that with the Primo Alma migration. Amazing how we all just stepped up and helped each other. And I think this is another area where SUNYs can collectively share all of this stuff. And like I said, Shannon's pointed out some good stuff that's going on, and I encourage people to like get involved if they can, or just be aware.
And there's another link that's been shared for VPATs, another collection in the chat. And then now there's several "we'll miss you, Juan, and good luck" messages.
Thanks.
We've not had any other questions come in. Does anyone else have a question or comment that they'd like to share? Shannon says, we have a cohort of 10 people starting next week. The goal is to share efforts for the type of reviews that Big Ten is doing at the very least. And that is through, I believe, the SLSS, Shannon, correct? I know the call went out through the SUNY listserv a few weeks ago. Looking, and we had a large response. They had to narrow down to the 10. We had a lot of librarians who were willing to work on this initiative. So
that's good. That's good to know.
So it is through the shared library services, and they'll continue to form other groups as it evolves. And Nasli and Mark Greenfield from UB have been directing where the group is heading and where they're working toward.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, Mark was the other name, the other person it slipped my mind. I forgot to include.
All right, so it looks like we're through the questions, and we have a little extra time. I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to say to wrap up on, but the next session is at 3, so otherwise it looks like we have a short break.
Yeah, no, thank you, everyone. Thank you again. This is great turnout, over 50 people. And I'm glad that people are very interested in this, and the initiative is moving forward. Thank you, Shannon, for sitting on this and actually providing more useful information. And of course, Carrie, thank you so much for keeping me on track and providing your input. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
And the recording will be available when the conference recordings go up. So everyone will have an opportunity to come back and to go through if they need to.